Well, good evening, everyone. Dr. Josh here. Hope I'm lonesome. Here at Digital Hammurabi. And yes, this is our second stream today. We owe you guys. That's what I think. I mean, I know it's the summer and we slow down and all that stuff, but I don't know. I don't feel like we stream enough for you guys. So, yeah, I thought we'd do one here, and I've got the side chat up here in front of me, and I've got my Zoom whatever over on my right, and hopefully this will be a good call-in program. You guys know how much I love doing live things with people, particularly when people are contentious, but hey, I don't know, why the hell not? So, thank you all for being with us. I just noticed Benina Jr. said that it is 3 a.m. there, and I'm really sorry. Thank you for being with us, all of you that are over in what would be considered very, very late or early time zones. Thank you. Thank you for staying up with us or getting up with us. So tonight, by the way, if the audio sounds off, I think I might be coming in a little hot here. I'm gonna turn that down a little. But if the audio or the video looks weird or whatever, please let me know. But I know it's going to be hard to believe, but the topic again tonight will be slavery in the Hebrew Bible and in the ancient Near East. I know, surprise, surprise. Believe me when I tell you, I wish that we didn't have to keep talking about this. I never would have imagined that it would have been such a contentious, not that it wouldn't be contentious, but that once you presented the data, it would still be, I don't know, an issue. Anyway, whatever. It's fine. Cool. They're saying audio sounds good. So for those of you that may not know, I'm sure most of you do, we have been sort of on a bit of a journey of sorts, I suppose, with the topic of slavery in the Hebrew Bible. And the reason that it got started, I just kind of give some background here and then talk about my book really quickly, and then we'll put the Zoom number up. But you know, the reason that I started talking about this topic was I've heard, as I was listening to different people discuss atheism, agnosticism, theism, all that stuff, you know, slavery would come up as a sort of a defeater, perhaps. Sorry, Trevor just said, did you finally decide to unreverse the screen so we can read the t-shirts? Is that a thing? I didn't know you could do that. I didn't actually know that was a problem. Can you guys read this? By the way, this is my Raging Atheist t-shirt, which he commissioned Megan to do a month ago or something. Yeah, 100% reprobate. It's a fun shirt to wear. If you haven't watched his video that he did, I kind of put a funny picture up a couple of weeks ago, a week ago. I don't know when it was, actually. Everything's starting to run together. But, okay, Steve says you can read it. Maybe it's because I'm using the camera instead of Zoom. Maybe that's what it is. I've got the actual camera running as opposed to capturing it on Zoom. Maybe that's what it is. Anyway. But yeah, you should go watch his stream. It won't be hard to find because there's a picture, a goofy ass picture of me doing this on the front. But anyway, okay, enough of all that. So I heard a lot of what I consider to be misinformation about slavery, really on both sides. I think perhaps more on one side than the other, but nonetheless. And so I thought it would be a good idea to put some videos out. At first, it was just go on a show like Skylar or Non-Sec or something like that and try to I don't know, smooth things out. And it quickly turned into putting some videos together, for people, and then just for our own channel, and then finally doing some response videos. At any rate, I feel like I've spent more time than perhaps I'd like to admit looking at slavery in the Hebrew Bible and in the ancient Near East, but nonetheless, it's been worth it. It's been good. Hope everybody's benefited at least somewhat from it. But where we are now, I think, is oh, sorry, people are telling me how to swap the image in very good. Thank you. So yeah, right. So anyway, I decided that if I spend all this time to do research on a particular topic, then I'm going to just go ahead and put it in writing. I have to write scripts for all these videos anyway, so I have written a book. The rough draft is done. I finished it up this week. I kind of do it in my spare time. It'll probably end up being 100, 150 pages. I mean, it's not going to be some, major thing, but it's going to be an overview. Oh, we have a super chat. All right, I'll read it in just a second. Thank you, Mr. Chessa. But it's an overview of slavery in the Hebrew Bible, in the ancient Near East, and then going through the main passages, Exodus 21, Deuteronomy 15, Deuteronomy 20 a little bit, and Leviticus 25, and just dealing exegetically with those passages when it comes to the issues of slavery. And yeah, so I think it'll be good, but again, it's not going to be anything groundbreaking, nothing that you can't find, by looking at the books on that shelf. But that, of course, is the goal of this channel, is to try to make that bookshelf available to you in a palatable format. So look for that to come out in the editing process now, and then I'll have Megan read through it and tell me all the ways that it can be improved. And then we'll get it printed and available to you. But tonight, what I'd like to do, and I'm going to go ahead and put the Zoom number up, is I am going to take a bit of a risk here, because you guys know how much I love doing things live. I'm going to allow people to call in, and if you have problems with things that I've said about slavery, if you have questions about it, if you, I don't know, just want to tell me that I smell, that'd be weird. Maybe don't do that. But nonetheless, there are a lot of people that have been commenting recently. I don't know why, but it's okay. I mean, it's fine. I'm glad people are watching the videos. But yeah, if you really want to, bring it to me, if this is your chance, you want to lay the smack down on old Josh, this is your time to shine. So when you come in, you'll be muted, and they don't come in if you've been watching, they don't come in necessarily in order. So I'll try to catch who's come in first. But yeah, let me read this super chat from Miss Jessa. Oh yeah, so Miss Jessa for 10 pounds. Thank you. 10 euros. Wow, this is terrible. I spent a year in Germany and I can't pick up the difference. Why am I blanking on that? Okay. Anyway, yeah, I think it's yours. Anyway, sorry I haven't watched your videos for a long time. I've been tired from work. Perhaps you just need to evolve a bit more. Okay, I'm here to help. I haven't forgotten you, though. I still love what you do. Winky face. Okay. Great content for a history nerd like me. Well, one of the things that we know from history is that the Earth is only 6,000 years old. And so there's only so much history that we can really get into, okay? So this is my wife. That's a picture of her. Thank you very much. Okay. Also, if you see me blinking a lot, it's sort of a reaction. My eye has been bothering me, and it's what I do. So while we're waiting for people to call in, if you have questions, you can put them in the side chat as well. I'll try to I'll try to catch them. Please tag me at Digital Hammurabi. So Nick J asks, what are your thoughts, if any, on the 𝀭Support papyrus? Yeah, that's not something I'd probably feel comfortable doing off the cuff there. But let me write it down somehow. I never come prepared to do that. Maybe Megan, if she's listening in the room, can take a picture of the question or something. But yeah, I should have prepared a little more. Since there aren't any calls, I should probably have prepared to say more. So let's go back over, maybe while we're waiting, sort of a basic breakdown of slavery in the Hebrew Bible, because I know everybody watching here is probably not tired at all of hearing about it. Casey Atheist Randy says, what does Megan have left for her doctorate? She is what we call all but dissertation. She is in the process of writing it, and so that's all that's left, is just finishing it up. Which, of course, that's not I say that as if it's some easy thing to do. Of course, it's very, very difficult. But right. So slavery in the Hebrew Bible. Oh, here's a question from Steve Bowden. If the Bible permits slavery, what can American citizens do to lobby their government to repeal the 13th Amendment? I'm assuming that was asked tongue-in-cheek. You know, one of the things... Oh, Miss Jessa says, next super chat I will send will be particularly tailored for Kent Hovind voice. Thank you. I enjoy those. One of the things that I pointed out, I did a stream this morning, early this morning actually, on a Jay Passek's channel. I went on and talked to them for a little bit. Nice channel if you haven't checked them out. It's a lot of fun. But one of the things that I think I need to point out, we talk about the issue of slavery in the Hebrew Bible, and this gets brought up an awful lot actually, and I think this is really important, and not just for me, but I think I can safely speak for Skylar as well. You know, when we look at something, okay, Nick J, I see your question. I'll talk about that in just a second. One of the things that is very important in this issue is nobody is trying to say that if you accept the Bible, if you accept the Hebrew Bible in particular, but you know the entire Bible, in sort of the fundamentalist evangelical, from that perspective, that interpretive framework, that hermeneutic, where you say the Bible is the inspired word of God, and you mean that in the sense being inerrant, down to the historical and using a historical grammatical hermeneutic, blah blah blah. That the Bible goes, the Old Testament in particular, goes to great lengths, I think, to depict the God of the Old Testament as a just and loving and righteous, and just and loving and caring deity, right? That they're going to great lengths to try to depict it that way. Now, of course, when we look at it from our perspective, a lot of the things that, you know, from a 21st century perspective, a lot of the things that the God of the Old Testament does seem sketchy, right? But I think that people take away sometimes from these discussions where we talk about slavery, we talk about, you know, when Skylar goes to like 1 Samuel 15 or 2 Samuel, David's baby, you know, that the goal is to show God to be a moral monster. And so you hear people like Paul Copan in his book trying to argue against, you know, the idea that God is a moral monster. That's not what we're arguing. And again, it's not what I'm arguing, and I don't think that Skylar would have any problem with me saying that's not what he's arguing. Fact of the matter is, I think that if you if you try to interpret the biblical text in that, from that hermeneutical approach, it's coherent. Now, it's not coherent in all of the details, in my opinion, because I think you have a lot of contradictions in the Old Testament text in particular. And so there are going to be problems if you read somebody like Gerstenberger. Gerstenberger points some of these things out. Of course, he's not the only one, but, like in passages like Leviticus 25, 44 to 46 kind of stands out as an oddity, particularly, and people point this out, as like a counter to me, somebody like me, to say, well, look at, Leviticus 19, it says you're supposed to care for the foreigner. You're supposed to love your neighbor as yourself. And say, how can you have slavery? And that's why these passages sort of stand out. And but again, if you, in general, take this position that the Hebrew Bible is the Word of God and that it is, inerrant, that strictly speaking, I would say that for the most part, that's a coherent position to say that the God of the Old Testament, they go to great lengths, the writers go to great lengths to show, to try to show that he's a loving and just God. So when you look at things, I mentioned this morning, when you look at things like the flood account in Genesis 6 through 9, there's a contrast there to what you see in the Samaritan and the Akkadian versions of the text. The God of the Old Testament is perfectly just. He doesn't need an Enki, an Ea, to come along and try to help out humanity. The things that sorry, I gotta stop reading through the side chat. You guys are so awesome. I want to read all your comments and questions. I can't. So, okay, I think I've stated that enough. So, that being said, what we're trying to do is to say, okay, is that the best interpretive model to understand the data points? So if the data points are, we have this Old Testament text, for example, and again, just kind of sticking with the Hebrew Bible, we have this Old Testament text. It's clearly been edited. You have, however you want to understand the sources there and the way that the text was put together and redacted, however you want to understand that. If you look at the text and you see that sort of development, and then you see these sorts of what we would consider today atrocities being committed in the Hebrew Bible by the God of the Old Testament. And we look at that from a 21st century perspective and we say, okay, this is problematic. This argument that an all-loving God would do these things to us seems, well, problematic. Sorry. I just noticed. Was he being, I thought he was being funny. Sorry, I may have missed some of the things that were said. I should not try to figure that out. Sorry, I'm going to stop. I can't. Damn. Okay. I don't have any idea what God. Hate MS. Right. I have no idea what I was talking about. Anyway, let me answer the question that I saw earlier. Oh, okay. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, sweetheart. I totally missed that. Okay, so the question was, where is it? Did you see, this is Nick J, did you see Soli Deo Gloria's video on Leviticus 25:46? If so, what are your counter thoughts? Yeah, that question actually came up this morning in the stream as well. And Lisa for Truth I See also your question, what about God's Asherah? It's a good question. Let me see if I can't. Math Pig says slavery, Josh. Yes. Okay. Yeah, I didn't quite understand Soli's, and Soli and I think we get along just fine, so I think it's fine to say this. I think he knows I'm not poking at him at all. But I didn't quite understand his argument. So we're going to be talking at some point in the near term, and I don't know when. I think it's going to be this week, maybe coming up. I have to ask Skylar, but he's going to be coming on. He's going to be coming on Skylar's channel to talk, I think, about that. I think originally we were supposed to be talking about some of his views on law in the ancient Near East and in the Hebrew Bible. But yeah, so I'll try to summarize what I caught. And this may not be his fault. This may be my fault. I just didn't listen to it carefully enough. I'm not sure. But it seems like he's making the argument that verses 44 to 46 continue the same idea in 39 to 43, where it's talking about if and forgive me if I think I got the verse numbers right there. I don't have it in front of me, but when it's talking about sort of the progression of could be a progression, probably is, it's debatable, but of a Hebrew, an Israelite there that is falling into poverty. And so I should really just hide the chat because I definitely can't do this. Guys, I'm so sorry. This is so hard for me to do. Right, so verses 39 to 46 pick up on like sort of the one, not the worst case scenario, but a worsening scenario for an Israelite, where an Israelite has had to sell off a piece of land earlier in the chapter, and then an Israelite can't support himself any longer, perhaps or ostensibly because he sold off his land. He has no way to make money anymore. And then ultimately, so during those, stages of going into poverty, thank you guys very much for your patience. Fellow Israelites are to help them out, or to step in and to take care of them. And they're not to think, as you see in like Deuteronomy 15, they're not to think things like, what if, how are we going to support ourselves, or, whatever. And so then when you come in to verses 39 to 43, the scenario is shifted to the point where the person has had to either sell, ostensibly he's had to probably sell his family, parcel out his family, and ultimately sell himself as the paterfamilias into slavery, into debt slavery. What's supposed to happen? And the Israelites, to this point, in the other scenarios, are supposed to give money. Our kinsman redeemer is supposed to come in and make sure they buy back the land so that it doesn't, stay outside of his land, and then, or outside of the clan, or outside of the family. And then ultimately, in the year of Jubilee, the 50th year, debts are forgiven. All the land is to be returned. So property and people are supposed to go back. And in 39 to 43, the text is saying, all right, now, if you have an Israelite that falls into slavery and has to sell himself to you, you're not to treat him as a slave. Now, this is different. If you go back and read Exodus 21, you see that that's not the case in Exodus. In Exodus 21. Did I say 23? I meant 21. That's not the case. So you could have an Israelite, very clearly you could have an Israelite serve you for 6 years. In the 7th year, they would go free if they had married, another slave, a slave woman that was given by the master and had children with that slave woman. Then, the wife and the children belonged to the master. But then, of course, the Israelite slave, could agree to permanent slavery and go through the ritual of the year and all that stuff. Okay, this is different. It's modified slightly in I think what most people would agree is the later text of Deuteronomy 15, probably like a 7th century text. At least I think that's the going understanding. And where now the slave is released, the slave is being released in the 7th year after 6 years, but now it's not just being released to go free, but now things are being provided, goods are being provided. And there's some debate about, is it the same sort of slave as in Exodus 21? I tend to think that it is, but nonetheless, it's not really a huge deal. So then when you get to Leviticus 25, there's a further development, and I've brought this up before. I think it's Jackson that wrote the article. I have to look. It might be Levinson, but wrote an article comparing and contrasting the construction of Exodus 21 and the law that's given there, and the law that's given in Leviticus 25, showing that these are essentially, Leviticus 25 is turning Exodus 21 on its head. And I see a super chat. I will explain that turning on its head in just a minute. Oh, it's Miss Jessa again. Thank you very much. Miss Jessa, for 10 years. My son, again, I think that's yours, but that's so terrible that I can't pick that out. I need to look. Can somebody help me out here? Correct me if that's not a euro. My son was afraid of dentist, so I hired a slave to beat him. Okay. Also, please take this cyanide as a cancer cure. And if you let it, it'll evolve and cure. Okay. Okay. Also, I like to promote eugenics. Even not really even sure if I know what that is, but okay. I promote eugenics, even though that is a straw man I use against evolution. Okay. Of course, we know that evolution is a religion, and that's fine. If you want to believe that, it's the dumbest religion I think it's ever been in existence, and that's fine if you want to believe it, but don't have taxpayer money funding it in our schools. Okay. Thank you, Miss Jessa. Let's see. Okay. Yes, it's yours. Perfect. I was starting to worry about myself there. Okay, so right. By the way, if you're just joining us, I'm not excited about the idea of doing this, but I think it's necessary to do. I've put a Zoom number there, and if you want to call in and challenge me, there have been a lot of people in the comments over the past couple of weeks, I think, and maybe they're coming from what do you meme. It's fine. I mean, I'm glad that people are coming and watching the videos, but yes, people have been criticizing, which is fantastic, all about it. But if you want to come in specifically tonight and challenge me on some of the things that I've said, here's your chance, come on down. I'm not terribly excited about it because I hate that sort of live one-on-one stuff, but so, hey, there you go. Okay. But Leviticus 25, the argument is that the text is going quite far in saying, look, you can't make Israelites eveds anymore. You can't make them eveds. You can't make them slaves. You have to treat them as what's called in Hebrew the sachir, the hired worker. So they're going to get paid wages. It's a much better, it's a much better position to be in. And now the interesting thing is that, I see a caller. So I'm going to put a pin in that. And let's see. Unmute. All right, caller. Are you there?
Hello.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, hold on.
Yeah.
Can everybody else hear you? Yes. Okay, good. I was looking at the wrong line. How are you tonight?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well. Doing well.
I like your hoodie. It must be hot. It must be cold there.
Yeah, it's not. It's definitely not. We've got the air conditioning turned way down because it's like 100 degrees outside. So.
Okay. I wanted to ask for you to comment on maybe Deuteronomy 25:11.
Sure. Let's see. I probably should have prepared.
Sorry, I don't really have a slavery question for you, but
let's see. Let me pull up. I don't know why I didn't think that I should have an app open that I can look up a biblical verse if I'm going to have a call-in program. I am quick, caller, in case you didn't know that. Hang on, let me get I'm pulling BibleWorks up here. So okay,
that's fine.
All right, so Deuteronomy 25:11, you said?
Yes.
Okay, so if two men, a man and his countrymen, are struggling together, and the wife of one comes near I'll read it in the NASB, that's fine. Okay, and the wife of one comes near to deliver her husband from the hand of the one who is striking him, and puts out her hand and seizes his genitals, verse 12, then you shall cut off her hand, you shall not show pity. You just want me to comment on it?
I just wonder if you could, comment, give some context.
Yeah. So this is actually somewhat of a general. I would argue that it's part of the legal tradition in the ancient Near East. You see this in, I think it's in the Middle Assyrian laws. Can't remember which number.
So like.
Sorry, go ahead.
Good advice anytime?
Oh, definitely not. No, definitely not.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say that laws like this, these are, I guess this is what I'm arguing, is that the legal system here, while this would have been considered part of the normal legal tradition in the period, so would things like sacrificing children. I certainly these are not things in any sense that we should adhere to, and I think that's the material point. So, I guess what I would say is verses like this, and I appreciate you bringing it up because verses like this, they're like really stark, right? It's like really clear. Boy, this would be problematic if we did this today. Of course, things like stoning children and these other things. Boy, this thing's getting demonetized, isn't it? Damn it. But nonetheless, they show that to us today, it would be, I think, outrageously insane for us to try to adhere to these laws. But if you look back at the legal tradition and the customs, the practices in the ancient Near East, this isn't out of the ordinary in that sense. And so I think what we all need to be really careful of, and I feel like the majority of my time is spent arguing with fundamentalist evangelical Christians, saying, stop trying to push the Old Testament laws on people. But I do think we need to balance that and say we don't want to just say that the God of the Old Testament is a moral monster in other words, they would not have considered, the writers of the Old Testament text and really in the period, I don't think that they would have considered these sorts of things to be monstrous or immoral. I think they would have been considered part of the culture at the time. But I think and then I'll stop talking to let you comment, but I think what I would say is that this shows that morality changes, right? It develops. And I think that's an important thing to realize. So when we come to laws about like stoning members of the LGBTQ community, that's, a fallacious thing to say, well, look, here, it says we should stone them in the Old Testament, or it says in Leviticus 20 that, they should be killed. Well, then, it's bad. That doesn't follow, in my opinion.
I agree. I think it can sound to some people like some people would be putting the God of the Bible up for ridicule by pointing out some of these verses. And I'm just trying to see from their point of view. Maybe that's kind of where they're coming from. So it's almost like an insult to even bring it up.
Yeah. It's funny because I mentioned this actually on the stream this morning on 𝀭Support's channel, that I've talked to Skylar. I don't know if you watch us on Skylar's show, but
sometimes.
Yeah. I said, I don't know how I feel about the Raptor Jesus thing, and not because I think that, somehow we're offending a deity or something, but just because, I don't know. But so, and he, so this is nothing that he doesn't know. I'm not catching him off guard if he watches this, but the thing is, it's sort of in fun, and I think we're probably doing something similar to what I don't know the motives of the people that did Monty Python, but it's that's sort of similar thing, and even there was
they just wanted to be funny.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there's a Christian group. I don't know if anybody's seen this, but there's a Christian. I think it's a Christian group that put out something called Vintage 21. I don't know if you've seen that, but
no, I haven't seen that yet.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun to it's a church group, I think, that took that old 70s Jesus movie and dubbed over the voices. And so there's a part where Jesus walks into the temple, when they have all the money changers, and he says, it zooms in on his face, and he says, "What in the name of me is going on in here?" Yeah, but that's
called, what's it called again?
Vintage 21. I think if you just go to YouTube, yeah, there are 4 of them. Like there's the scene, I don't know if you remember in the Gospels, where the Pharisees come to Jesus as he's teaching, and they say, like, paraphrasing, but like, should we pay taxes? And he says, "Do you have a coin?" And he shows him a coin. He says, "Whose face is on it?" They say Caesar's. And he says, "Render unto Caesar's that which is Caesar's, render unto God that which is God's." Well, in the dub, he says, the Pharisees come up and say, "Yes, my associate and I were wondering, that is to say, we were wondering if you could get us into heaven. We know a lot of Bible verses, and we're very nicely dressed, as you can see." And Jesus says, "Well, how much money do you have?" And he hands him a coin, and he says, "1 coin? Are you serious? Well, I can get you more." No, you had your chance, and you blew it. You'll never get into heaven now." And then they walk away, and he says, "That sucker doesn't even realize I kept his coin." But, sort of funny stuff. I think they're trying to mock this idea that, that maybe the idea that Jesus was this, white guy that looks a lot like us, and maybe that's not exactly the right way we should picture him. But anyway, I don't know. I rambled on a lot there, caller, so sorry about that.
No, that was fine. Okay. I just wanted to ask you that question and have you elaborate a little bit, and I appreciate it.
I really appreciate it. Thank you for calling.
My pleasure.
Take care. Bye. All right. Well, that was good. That was a lot less painful than what I thought it would be. He probably took it easy on me, which is good. Oh, and I haven't looked at the side chat at all. So sorry. Maybe if there are questions that I missed, Megan she may have already texted me. Anyway, yeah, sorry guys. Oh, we have 69 people watching. Good grief. Thank you all very much. Okay, so let's continue with the Leviticus 25 idea. And so what I think Leviticus 25, 44 to 46 is doing, and I've mentioned this in the videos, but just to kind of recap on it here, and maybe this will... Huh? Oh, okay, perfect. Thank you. I have the most amazing wife, like, in history. Sorry, wives out there. You guys are amazing too, but she's, like, incredible. But right. So 44 to 46, and then Megan said she's texting me some of the questions from the live chat. You know, because, and now I'm stepping back out of this, you know, Moses wrote the Pentateuch, you know, interpretive model. I'm stepping back into actually what I think the text is doing, how it was composed. Leviticus 25 is, I think that what's happening here is this is of course, this is a later text, part of the Holiness Code, in my opinion, and it's reacting to what it sees in Exodus 21, and this is common in the Pentateuch, right? This is common in the biblical text. So, when we look at verses, you know, the chapter itself, I think, is a reaction to Exodus 21, saying, look, you can't keep Israelites as slaves. Can't do that. Can't treat them as slaves. So there are people that have different opinions. If you read through Jacob Milgram, if you read through Gerstenberger, you know, these guys have different opinions as to what Leviticus 25 is doing and why is it that it goes from ostensibly goes from it's released in the 7th year to release in the year of Jubilee, which is the 50th year. Why is that? And, you know, it's been theorized that maybe because you couldn't keep an Israelite as a slave, you couldn't treat them as a slave, but you had to pay them, you know, treat them as a hired worker, that then to sort of compensate for that, you could keep them for longer. Whatever the case may be, there's a development there, I think, that this is also debated, by the way. Trying to remember the article that I read. There are some people that say that it's actually not better for the Israelite, but I think that it is. Thus far, I've been convinced of that, but I could change my mind. But anyway, but when you get to verses 44 to 46, I think what the text is doing is saying, okay, look, you can't have Israelites as slaves anymore. Where are you supposed to get them? And I think that's what the text is addressing. So your Eveds, your Evadim, and your Amas, you know, your male slaves, your female slaves, these are the ones that are to these are the ones that are to come from, or you can get them not from the Israelites, can't get them from the fellow Hebrews, but you get them from the Goyim, right, the nations that are around, and you get them from the Toshavim, which the Toshavim is difficult in and of itself. Lots of work has been, a great deal of work has been done on trying to piece together exactly what the Toshavim are. They're clearly foreigners that are living in the land, but you know what role they're playing specifically is difficult to really nail down. As it stands, I'm leaning toward tenant farmers, but I mean, you know, I haven't done anywhere near enough research to identify that. In fact, is this the volume? Yes. So this is a edited volume, 2011. If you guys are interested in this sort of thing, The Foreigner and the Law. Maybe I can put this in the description. It's I'll read you some of the articles that are in here. Sorry, I keep forgetting I have to keep by the mic. So Foreigners under Foreign Rulers. This is from Kassite, Babylonia. So the second half of the 2nd millennium BCE. Stigmatizing associations, the alien, things alien, and practices associated with aliens in biblical classification schemas. By the way, this is not aliens like Zechariah Sitchin aliens. This is like foreigners living in the land. So Reinhard Achenbach wrote an article discussing the Ger, the Nochri, the Toshav, and the Zar. And he entitled it Legal and Sacral Distinctions Regarding Foreigners in the Pentateuch. So you can see these, you know, these articles are dealing very specifically with this idea of aliens. And in fact, there's an article in here by Bruce Wells, who has written a fair amount. He wrote with Raymond Westbrook and, you know, did a lot of work on the law in the ancient Near East. But he has an article in here, the quasi-alien in Leviticus 25. So it's actually it's a pretty good article. But anyway, maybe I'll do a summary of that. I can't remember exactly what he argues in it, but that was a couple months ago when I read it. But so I guess my point is that foreigners and the idea of who are the ger and the toshav and the nochri and some of these other designations of foreigners that you see in the Pentateuch, it's difficult. It's not straightforward what these things are. So when you hear people say, "Oh, the ger is X," I mean, it depends on what you're saying, but yeah, it's difficult. But I think the material point is to sort of come back. I'm really sorry. I feel like I'm all over the place tonight, guys. But to sort of come back to it, in Leviticus 25, 44 to 46, these are, I think this is the response saying, okay, who are we allowed to keep, who are the Israelites allowed to keep? Not we, who are the Israelites, the recipients of this text, allowed to keep as slaves, as eveds proper and amaz proper. Excuse me. And if you can't keep the fellow Israelites, then it's foreigners. So those that are around, those that are in the land. Now, I would imagine that the majority of these would have been debt slaves, right? These have been debt slaves that fell into poverty in foreign lands and were became defaulted on their debts and couldn't pay them back, and ultimately ended up as chattel and were sold, to to Israelite owners. I doubt that the text is talking about, strictly speaking, about prisoners of war. They may be involved there, and prisoners of war, I think, is a little anachronistic, but at any rate, certainly they're not the only ones. If they are involved, they're certainly not the only ones involved in Leviticus 25, 44 to 46. But those are just talking about the ones that are coming from the nations around. But then you have those that are in the land, and I think the thing that we need to really focus in on this is not so much how did they become slaves. I don't think that's such, because I don't think the text is really dealing with that necessarily. But what the distinction is essentially how you can treat them. You can treat them as eveds. You can't treat the Israelites as eveds. You have to treat them as hired workers. But those coming from the land around and from the that are living in the land, those you may treat as slaves. Okay, we have another caller. All right, caller, you are on the air. Hey.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. This is Steve Bowden calling.
Hey, Steve, how are you?
I'm doing okay, thank you. I just have a quick question.
Now, I know this one, Steve, is going to be really antagonistic. I can tell. Just hear it in your voice.
Yes. Oh, I know. Well, I am told that I have a very sarcastic voice.
You have a radio voice, I think.
Oh, thank you. I should really try out for radio. But I want to ask you about the children produced between the union of slaves. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering, were they condemned to a life of slavery then? The law?
Yeah, so I'll answer this from outside of the worldview that is. I'll answer it from my understanding of the Pentateuch. So, yes, in Exodus 21, I mean, I think that's the material point, is that, if the man who has gone into slavery, into debt slavery, and when he's freed, those children and his wife, that if they've been given by the master and the children are born to that union, that they're the property of the they're houseborn slaves. which we see in Genesis. I think Genesis 17. You see in Leviticus 22. It's in Exodus as well. Can't remember where off the top of my head, but you have houseborn slaves. And if you read in Ecclesiastes 2, Kohelet talks about how he has more slaves than anybody, and they are either purchased by him or they are born in his house. And so these are, these are property, and they stay with the master. Now, I think that when you get to Leviticus 25, this later text is turning that on its head. And I think Leviticus 25 is saying, all right, you can, those children, that are with the paterfamilias, they go free. Now, it's debated whether that's true or not, that they actually do go free. It's possible that the text is only citing because it's talking about a debt slave, that the children are children that he would have sort of parceled out before he went into slavery, and so they would have been his children coming into slavery, into debt slavery, which even in Exodus 21 they would have gone back out with him. So that's debated, right? But if it is addressing in Leviticus 25 children that are born to a marriage to a slave woman that was the master's, then in the year of the Jubilee they are to all go free. So I don't really have a position on that. I haven't looked into that specific aspect of the text. But yes, I mean, but I think the point then, if that's the case, if in Leviticus 25 the text is saying you have to let the children go free at this point, remember it's in the 50th year, so potentially they're slaves for 49 years. Of course, if they become slaves in the 48th year, they're only a slave for a year, that sort of thing. But yes, in Exodus 21, I think that's the point of the text, and I think that in Leviticus 25, that's the point that the writer's trying to get away from. And so you can't keep them for life. You have to set them free eventually. It's all about, the Jubilee, returning them to the land, people and property. But then, of course, as you well know, Steve, verses 44 to 46 are saying, now, if you want to keep them for life, if you want slaves proper, can't get them from Israel. You got to get them from the Israelites. You have to get them from foreigners.
Which makes me worried that America might make slaves of Canadians like me. So.
I shouldn't laugh at that. But this is right. This is really the danger of, I think, of not understanding how to interpret the biblical text. Even people that, I'll say this: it's the minority. I hope. God, I hope I say that. No, I'm not sure, but. I hope that it's the minority that would look at people like members of the NIFB that would look at the Old Testament text and say we need to follow that law as it stands. I hope that they're the minority.
Me too.
Yeah.
Well, thanks very much.
Yeah.
And while you're talking about the subject of your new book, maybe later, if you get a chance, you can tell us how your book is organized.
Oh yeah,
because it's like such an enormous topic.
Oh yeah, absolutely. In fact, I'll pull the table of contents up and read it out.
Well, that's a great idea. Okay, well, thanks very much, and I'll get back to watching the show.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks for calling in.
Alrighty,
All right,
bye-bye.
bye. All right. Okay. So I think Megan is texting me questions. So let me see if I can't get some of these. Actually, let me read the table of contents real quick, because I am afraid that I will forget that the moment that I walk away from it. Oh, I don't have a table of contents, but I do have my layout. Hold on. Okay. So there's an introduction, obviously. Then overview of slavery in the Hebrew Bible. So it's just a chapter that's not... let me preface it with this. The book has a ton of citations of secondary literature. part of one of my two goals, and I stated in the introduction, is this is not a groundbreaking book. If you're looking to this book to find out some new detail about slavery in the Hebrew Bible and the ancient Near East, to like a dissertation topic, that you're not going to find it, right? There's nothing new in this book, nothing that you can't find in the books behind me, in the articles and whatever that they cite. That's not the point of the book. The point of the book is to try to, and Dean Martin asked about the Sumerian book. It's coming. It's still under peer review. I think we're waiting. Megan can correct me, but I think we're still waiting on two or three people to come back with their peer review comments, and then we'll get it done. But the point of the book, one major point of the book, is to try to say, here's what mainstream scholarship says, and here are the things that they debate, and here are the things that they basically agree about. Because I think that's actually a really important thing for us to know when you look at any topic like this that's debated. What do scholars say about it? Now, that does not mean that what they say is correct. I think if you've been watching us for any amount of time, that goes without saying. But it's really important to take seriously and to understand why scholars say what they say and what the majority of scholars say about it. So there's an overview of slavery in the Hebrew Bible, chapter 1, and chapter 2 is overview of slavery in the ancient Near East. So I talk about things like concepts of law in general. It's nothing really in depth. What we mean, or what they mean when they talk about a legal tradition and how that affects the biblical text, and then how to deal with things like these law codes. Yes. So then chapter 3 is exegesis of the main passages that deal with slavery. So Exodus 21, Deuteronomy 15, Deuteronomy 20, and then Leviticus 25. And then the last chapter is common objections that I hear. So, a lot of, what about, for example, the big one that I hear all the time is how can God condone slavery and yet say in Leviticus 19, love your neighbor as yourself? Those two things are mutually exclusive. So I kind of deal with that. And then a conclusion. And there'll be a extensive bibliography in it pertaining to slavery, and but lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of citations of scholars in the field. So, and because it's a call-in program, I want to make sure I get all the calls in first before I do the questions here. So we have another caller. All right, caller, you are on the air. Hi.
Hello?
Can you hear me? You there?
Hang on. I am here. I can't actually hear you.
Really?
Well, actually, I can hear you. I can't hear if I'm on.
You are. You definitely are on.
Me.
Yep.
Okay. I must be getting audio through this and not through the stream.
That's right. You are. Yep. That's correct.
Okay. Sorry about that.
No,
I've confused everyone, and I apologize profusely. My point actually was to make things less confusing. I have what I wanted to actually bring up was a way to articulate what you're saying, not the academic, so rhetoric is kind of one of my things. I think a very good way to articulate the point you're making is not, the point is not that God is a moral monster. Mm-hmm. It's that because of what's in the Old Testament. It's that the Old Testament permits and even encourages things that are antithetical to human happiness, provably antithetical to human happiness. And as such, we should not treat the Old Testament as the word of a perfect omnipotent deity. That's not to say that God must be a moral monster. There are arguments someone could make for that, the point that God is a moral monster too, but the Old Testament isn't really one of them. And it's not the point you're trying to make. The point you're trying to make is the Old Testament clearly is not the work of a perfect deity or a thing that we should particularly follow, because things in it are are, we now know to be antithetical to human happiness. They at that time didn't recognize that because they didn't know as much as we do, and also because they lived in a world that was vastly different from our own. It's very easy for us to condemn slavery now that we're in a post-industrial world, / we still use slavery it's just the slaves aren't in America, they're in factories in China and other countries, and we don't see it.
Right.
But so it's super easy for us now to say slavery is wrong because it's really easy for us in the modern world to see that. But in a Bronze Age to early Iron Age economy, understanding that it was wrong to certainly that it was wrong to mistreat the slaves. Well, I mean, that's something that some people maybe wouldn't have thought about, couldn't have cared about. And the fact that there are actually downsides to the broader economy from slavery is something that took a very long time to figure out. We can see that in retrospect, that it seems to have done some pretty questionable things to the economies of countries like, I'm going to pick on Rome, because I actually know about Rome. I don't know about the ancient Near East, but I know a little bit about Rome. I'm not an expert or anything, but, if there's too many slaves, it can obviously mean that other people aren't working. We know that. At the time, it was really easy for a lot of people to not recognize that was the problem. And I think that's how the argument should be articulated, is the argument should be, we're not saying God's a moral monster. We're saying the Bible is a document that is imperfect, and as such is not the work of a perfect deity and should not be emulated in the modern world because it is antithetical to human happiness.
Yeah, I mean, I actually think that's a really fair way to articulate that. And I mean, from my point of view, and I said this this morning on Jay Pasik's channel, I don't know why I always feel compelled is the word that I'm looking for. I don't know why I always feel compelled to say, hey, I said this earlier somewhere else in case someone heard it there. I don't know why I do that, but and now I forgot what I was going to say. Anyway, yeah.
Well, you said it earlier on Jay Pasik's channel.
Yes,
so
whatever it was, I could kick it. You can go listen to it there. Anyway, yeah. No, that's good.
I'm sure it was really profound.
Yes, I'm sure. Quite. Oh, no, that's what it was. Yeah, so, I mean, at the end of the day, what I'm saying in all of this, like from bird's eye view, I suppose, is I gave the example of if you come into a room and there's a dead body lying on the floor, it's warm, and there's a gunshot in the chest, and there's a person standing over top of the body with a revolver in their hand, and there are 5 full rounds in the chamber and 1 empty casing that's clearly just been fired, and the person holding the gun is laughing maniacally. Those are the data points that, we all have, right? Okay. These are the things that are true. There's a body, person laughing, gun, it's just been fired, bullet hole, that's the bullet that killed them. Okay. The conclusion, the interpretive model that we have is that person standing there killed the person by shooting them, and it was murder because they're laughing, right? Well, if you got that person in the room and you in an interrogation room and you said, here's what we've got, you're guilty of murder, and they say, no, you don't understand. The gun actually it was sitting on a spoon, and it got hit up in the air accidentally, and I reached up to grab it, and when I grabbed it, I accidentally squeezed it and fired it into the person, and the person fell on the floor and died. And I always get really nervous, or I laugh when I get nervous, and so I laugh, and my laugh just kind of sounds maniacal. So it was totally an accident. I it was not done on purpose. Okay, that's, I don't know if plausible is the right word, but it's possible, right? It's possible that that's how that happened. that interpretive model accounts for all the data points. And if you adhere to that interpretive model, that there was an accident, spoon went up in the air or whatever, it accounts for everything that we see. But is it the interpretive model that best accounts for the data points? And I think that's kind of where I am with this. When I look at things like, is the Bible, let's just stick with the Hebrew Bible, is the Hebrew Bible the inspired word of God, inerrant and infallible? Well, if you say, well, the New Testament says this about it, and if you look at what Jesus says about it, then if you step into that worldview, there are a lot of ways that I think that can be coherent in that sense. But again, you have to adopt that in the same way that you have to adopt that, well, the person in the room said that it was an accident, and they explained it in a way that is possible. But is it the best way to explain it? And I think that's kind of where I am with this, where I say, I don't think it's the best way to explain it. I think there's an easier way and a more, what is it? Occam's razor, one that requires less, whatever. Yeah.
Assumptions.
Yeah. Assumptions. Thank you.
Assumptions. The Occam's razor, basically, people often misquote it as the simplest answer is usually right, but actually the universe is no obligation to be simple. What it really means is the one that requires the fewest assumptions is probably right. Something can be complicated, but it's the problem that we're stuck. I think the way, it was kind of a tangent, but I've come to accept that some people are going to be religious, and really a lot of people are going to be religious, because at the end of the day, it's a way to make the universe simpler and easier to deal with for them. And even scientists probably believe about 20 incorrect things about the way the world works every single day, because those things simply do not fall within their field. And so in some ways it's okay, and a flawed model for understanding the world can still be useful. Most of the physics you learned in high school aren't really right technically, but they're still useful for a lot of things, which is why we still learn them. And religion, I think, needs to be approached like that. I think the attitude religious people need to take is, okay, this is a model that helps me understand the world. It's not strictly right about everything, and so I need to take it for what it's worth and know that this cannot be useful for everything. Yeah. Right? The Bible can be that. The Quran can be that. I would say some religions are probably better for that than others, but people's ability, if there's one thing that's notable about people, it's the ability to cherry pick what they want. You can take the most peaceful religion in the world, and if you choose to interpret it right, you can still turn it into an excuse for violence. So, people turn atheism into an excuse for violence. I don't like it when people say atheism is the way to move forward. Mao and Stalin also thought that. But I think what it comes down to, and this does relate, because what you're essentially arguing is, you're making points about what the data says and what the Old Testament says, and inevitably the conclusion from that is this isn't a perfect document. And I think, one of the things religious people kind of need to accept is, okay, this isn't a perfect document. We shouldn't try to follow it to the letter. Right. We shouldn't expect it to explain everything, because it is in fact, right, it is written by men, and even if it wasn't originally written by men, it's been edited by men. But that doesn't mean you can't use some of it that it isn't potentially a useful interpretive framework if you understand its limitations. Sure.
Let's take it out of something controversial, and then I'm probably going to have to get to. There's one more caller.
It's fine. I talked too long.
No, you're good. This is actually amazing. I appreciate it. But let's take it out of the realm of something controversial, and let's say, can we look at Assyrian or Babylonian or even like early second millennium literary texts that talk about the gods and all these things. Can we get useful things out of that? Well, I mean, yeah, absolutely. And I don't think anybody would. I would hope that nobody would argue with that, even though a fundamentalist evangelical Christian would say that's not an inspired text. Those proverbs say things. I think that what they would just say is that whenever they mirror the biblical text, that's when they're good. But I mean, those types of things. I mean, it's the reason we study literature. So I think that's a really good point. Well, thank you. I really appreciate you calling in, and appreciate you sort of summarizing my thoughts for me in a more coherent manner.
No problem. It's a difference in background. You are an Assyriologist. I am, I guess, a career debater for the necessity of survival.
Yeah. Something
anyway,
I wish I had.
Thank you for having me on.
Thank you.
Now I'm going to have to figure out how to actually hang up.
Okay.
I have no idea.
I'll take care of it if you want.
All right, please.
All right. Thanks for calling in.
All right, bye.
Okay. That was nice. Okay. All right, caller, you are on the air. Hi.
Hey, Dr. Josh.
Hey, how are you?
I'm great. How are you doing?
Doing well, doing well.
Okay, I got a question. It's about slavery.
Okay.
It's more about interpretation, though.
Okay.
So when I look at a Bible passage, I'll give you two examples. One is from the New Testament, and one's a slavery passage.
Mm-hmm.
When we see something that says, if this, then that,
mm-hmm.
we tend to look at it like this applies in every single situation.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, Jesus said, if you believe hard enough, just ask God and he will give you anything.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's actually passages that say that. So, I've always wondered, is he really saying that God is a cosmic vending machine? And Christians will say, no, that it has to be within God's will, but it does, in those passages, it doesn't say anything about God's will.
Mm-hmm.
So when we get to like Exodus 21, where it says, if you beat your slave so bad that he gets bed rest and gets up after a day or two, then there will be no punishment. Mm-hmm. So the question about interpretation, are there extenuating circumstances that they're not mentioning, or does this mean if in every situation?
Yeah, I mean,
or do you know?
Yeah, complicated question. No, but it's good. It's a good question. It's one that's important to ask. So I think it kind of goes back to what was the law like? Like, as you say, this idea of if then seems like it's, oh, well, these are like they're laws in the way that we would think about them, right? So if a like, I don't know about you, but when I was growing up, I would picture when I'd read these things like, a judge sitting there with a big beard, and he would say, okay, let's look at the scroll and say, okay, so you hit a woman and her, she miscarried and the baby died, but the woman's okay. Okay, so what does the law say, guys? Okay, so this is the penalty. So we have to do that. And of course, that's how we would do it today, right? I'm not an attorney or anything, but I've watched a couple Law and Order episodes, so I feel very comfortable commenting extensively on the law. I'm just.
Well, don't be modest.
But
you're unqualified.
Yeah, but an attorney's going to say, "Well, Your Honor, in Smith versus Johnson, X happened. That's the and this was the determination of the court, and so this is how we need to rule." And that's not. It's. I think it's pretty clear. It's still argued. But I think the majority of people that work in this, in ancient Near Eastern law and in biblical law, would say at least to a high degree, a high level, these were not what they would call normative laws, right? They're not. It's not something that when, and again, this is in what actually happened. I guess we would say not so much in. From an internal perspective of the story of Mount Sinai or something. But when, these codes, let's go out of the Bible for a second and go to something like the Code, the Laws of Hammurabi. These are cases that were that came before and were I think adjudicated would be the right word to use there, by the king. Right? These are the cases. I mean, we know that with a high level of certainty, I think. And so when we look at those laws, it's not that when, Hammurabi said, all right, put down right there that if you get a debt slave, that they go free after 3 years, that then became the law, because it was written then. Now it's, legislation. It's now the law. That's not what those texts were meant to do. What those texts were doing was reflecting, maybe being born out of, I guess would be another way to say, the legal tradition that stood behind it, right? So the legal customs. And maybe a bad way to think about this, or not a bad, but an imprecise, but maybe a useful way to think about this, is that if you go to Sunday school, right? If your child goes to Sunday school and they come home with a note that says, little Jimmy had to sit in timeout today because he used the F word in Sunday school. That note, there's no law that's been created because the Sunday school teacher wrote on that note he had to sit in timeout. This happened, so this happened. And there was no law, like actual law probably, that stood behind, like you probably wouldn't be able to go to the church bylaws and it would say no using profanity in Sunday school, right? It's a tradition, it's a custom, it's what that group has agreed to, that this is how we behave, these are things that we do and don't do, and these are punishments that we agree on without it being legislated in that way. And so I think, again, trying to make that analogous in a loose way, that these laws are not becoming, they're not creating law, legislating law by going down. So it's not like, in all likelihood, judges went back to the Code of Hammurabi and read the stele and said, oh, okay, that's what I'm supposed to do. It's that there was a legal tradition that stood behind those laws, and those judges knew it, and they had some not wiggle room, but they had things that they could kind of do and things that they used to judge. And those cases are the reflection maybe of that. So then what I would say is, when you come to something like Exodus 21, and I'm being long-winded here, sorry.
That's right.
But I think what's happening here is that this is, in reality, a reflection of that legal tradition that stood behind what those judges did, and those judgments that they made, those customs. In fact, Exodus 21 calls them the mishpatim. These are the mishpatim, and that's translated a lot customs. And it very well may have significance there. I haven't actually looked into that specifically, but just sort of reflecting back on it, I suspect there's probably something there to that. And so, in that circumstance, to make it very real, I think the legal tradition behind that would be, what you see this in other legal texts, legal documents from the ancient Near East, where if you had probably what was a debt slave, in my opinion, what was a debt slave, but it's hard to tell. That's very debated. But if you beat that debt slave until he died, then there was punishment for that. But if not, then if the slave got up after a day or two, or if you read the text and understand it syntactically to mean, and the slave dies after 2 days, but lives for a day or two, then the idea here is that there's something may have intervened in between. It was punishment that the master was inflicting, and not murderous intent, because had there been murderous intent, he would have died immediately. So I don't know if that answered the question at all.
Yeah, I'm going to go back and listen to it. So one thing I've heard from, I don't think this, the answer that I've heard from some people, I don't know if it works or not. Like I heard one there's one guy on YouTube who always says, well, the reason they beat him is because he was breaking Mosaic law. And I just can't believe like a master would be in charge of beating a slave for breaking this. That can't be their function. I would imagine if if you stole something, I would imagine if there were beatings, I would imagine there'd be like a local magistrate to do it. I don't know how it worked back then. And like another guy said, well, what happened was more than likely the guy who beat a slave did it because the slave was threatening his wife, and he the only way he could get him off his wife is to hit him with a club or something like that. But I mean, that can't. They just don't. Based on the text, it just doesn't seem like that's a legitimate explanation.
Yeah, I mean, so a couple of things that I would say. At that point, you're talking about defense, right? So if the slave is trying to harm the master's wife, then there wouldn't be. I haven't thought that necessarily through to the end, but I doubt that there would be punishment.
Regardless,
because
he may have. It may have. The only thing that could happen is he could have had to kill him to, keep his wife safe. Maybe that's the case.
But I think the thing that is more important in that discussion is looking at the Proverbs. So if you look at the Proverbs and you see very specific, I think it's Proverbs 29. Where it talks about slaves don't respond to words, so if you pamper a slave from birth, he's going to turn out to be insolent. And, when you couple that with other passages there, like Proverbs 13, I think there are a bunch of them that talk about disciplining your son with a wooden rod, same word. The idea, I think, is, in my opinion, is pretty straightforward. And of course, early interpreters took it this way as well. That, the law, what that text is saying, again, in my opinion, in mainstream scholarship opinion, is this is a master that's disciplining his slave. And, the idea, I think, is particularly when you look at verses like 26 and 27, where it says if you knock out a tooth or damage an eye, you go, that those aren't arbitrary things that are brought up. In my opinion, I think what we're discussing here is that then the master is clearly beating the slave around the head to damage those things. And that's not discipline if he's beating the slave around the head with a wooden rod. I mean, that's an instrument that can kill. And so, the back is generally the place that the slave or the individual would be beaten in discipline. So I think the idea here is that if you have a situation where a slave dies immediately under the hand of the master, that it's clear that this wasn't just discipline, that there was murderous intent, and that's why that if the slave either survives and then gets up after a day or two, or survives and then dies, that there's mitigating circumstances that are assumed and granted to the master, that it wasn't murderous intent.
But just one more thing.
Sure.
Like, do you think in general, when you see, I'm just wondering if they thought differently back then, because like, you see like an if-then thing and you think it applies, unless there's exceptions given, you think it applies in every situation. So again, back to the example with Jesus and prayer. I look at those passages and to me, it sounds like he's saying, in any situation, God will give you whatever you want. And, maybe they had a different way of thinking back then that we're not privy to, or it's not the same as we think.
No, today. I wouldn't want to wade into that particular New Testament passage here, but what we don't,
it's just an example.
Yeah. What we don't want to do, or what I don't want to have come across here is that, that the legal tradition that stood behind those the cases was not in force. It definitely was, right? So in the same way, I think if we go back to our Sunday school profanity example, if another child comes in the following week and uses the F word, you're probably going to see the same punishment, right? It doesn't mean that just because that note is not normative legislation, that it doesn't create a law, that means that, that's that the law is all wishy-washy. It's a reflection, I think, of standards that exist. And so I do think that in these cases where, it talks about if this happens, then that happens, that's even though that's not a normative statement, that you are looking at a fairly regular legal tradition. And I think you see that throughout, just in the wider ancient Near East. You look at it through time, you see there's consistency in these generally speaking, in these laws. And so I think that legal tradition is in force, and it's pretty consistent, generally speaking, as you go through time. So
yeah. Okay.
I really appreciate you calling in. These were really good questions.
Appreciate your time.
Yeah. No, thank you very much for calling in.
Thanks.
All right. Take care.
All right. Take care.
All right. We have one more caller, and then I probably am going to call it a night because I am getting tired. I'm going about an hour and a half. So, okay. Caller, you are on the air. Hi.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. How are you?
Hey, I'm good. I'm probably a little tired myself, sir. I was wondering about something.
Sure.
And Numbers 31, of course, we see a little bit about child slavery. Hypothetically, sexual slavery, forced rape, forced marriage. What does this look like in the ancient Near East? Is this common? Is this kind of a mistranslation of it, a misunderstanding of it, or is this pretty accurate?
Yeah, so Numbers 31, just for everybody that's listening, I'm sure that everybody's familiar with the passage. But, this is a situation where you have a group of people that have come up against the nation of Israel as they're marching along, and God commands the people to take vengeance on them. This is that Baal of Peor incident from, I think, chapter 26. And so they're in Numbers 31. Basically what you end up having is the men and the basically everybody except the virgin women are killed, and they're taken and counted as plunder in the text. So yeah, common, yes. It was not only common in the ancient Near East, but this was, as far as plunder is concerned, generally speaking, what you had happen, if you look at a place like Deuteronomy 20, for nations that were outside of Israel proper, outside of the land of Israel, if you had a city that the nation approached and if they fought against Israel, then the city was to be emasculated, all the men were to be killed, and the women, the children, and the livestock were to become plunder for the people, and they would be turned into slaves. This is sort of the standard operating procedure, I think, in the ancient Near East in general. A lot of captive slaves, lots of them. In fact, I think it's argued that your two biggest sources of slavery in the ancient world, debt servitude and war captives. So yeah, I mean, here's what I would say about this from our perspective today. Passages like Numbers 31, Deuteronomy 21, where it talks about the female captive wife, this would be considered rape. I mean, I don't think you could go to a modern court of law and say, well, Your Honor, we won the war. Right. I mean, okay, so, I took her home as plunder and then made her my wife and had sex with her. But she said it was okay, right? I don't think that would fly, right? A person in that position can't give consent. They can't, right?
Yeah, I can't imagine that.
Yeah. So I mean, it's under duress, and I don't think anybody today would. I'm hoping that nobody today would try to make an argument against that. The question is, would they have viewed it that way? And I would say no. And I think that's the distinction that we probably need to make. Now, that being said, like, I don't think the point that I would want to make here is that I think it's pretty clear that our ideas of morality develop and change. And I think that's an important point to make in this whole discussion, because there's no reason, in my opinion, there's no reason for somebody to try to go and lessen what was done in the Old Testament from our perspective. I don't think there's any reason to do that. I think understanding it in the context of the ancient Near East and understanding that, you know, like how awful child sacrifice would have been in Israel, right? Well, I mean, like, you know, when the Moabite king stands up on the wall and sacrifices his son to defeat the Israelites, he doesn't think he's doing a bad thing. Now, we would think he's doing a bad thing, but he doesn't. And so morality shifts, ideas of morality shift and they change. And so, yes, I guess the short answer, I'm being really long-winded tonight, sorry. But I guess the short answer is yes, by our perspectives, those passages definitely describe rape and what we would consider sexual slavery. I don't think that they would have considered them such from their perspective. And so if you adopt the interpretive model that the Bible is the inspired word of God,
right,
then I think that it's coherent to say, well, this is, I at least think it's more understandable to a certain degree. This is God trying to bring about the development of, God's trying to regulate slavery or whatever. I mean, there are lots of other problems with it, I think. One is, while there are some developments in humanitarian treatment of people, there are some things that are better in the wider ancient Near East than in the Hebrew Bible. But nonetheless, different topic for a different day, I guess. But yeah, I get. Did that answer the question at all? I can't tell anymore.
I think so.
Okay.
From a point of view of a perfect, moral, unchanging being.
Yeah.
Yes, the actions are reprehensible.
Yeah.
But from our
good, sorry.
And from our point of view, they're reprehensible. But from ancient men, I'm having a hard time trying to figure out the words I'm trying to use here. But yeah, they're to be expected.
Yeah, I mean, like if we found out 500 years from now that grass actually has, I don't know, like in what's it called? What's that movie that I really love that I can't remember? Avatar. That trees like talk to each other and have feelings and emotions. If we found that out 500 years from now, they would probably look at us and go, "My God, look at they chop down trees, those murderous people." Well, right, from their perspective, knowing what they know and having the morality develop, we would look like barbarians. But from our perspective, we don't know that. And so chopping down a tree or walking on grass, we don't think it hurts them. So maybe that's
from our point of view, eating an animal is generally accepted.
Right.
But, in the future, it may be quite different.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so like we went out for a burger last night to Red Robin. Am I a horrific human being? I mean, there are obviously people today that would say yes, and I understand that. But 500 years from now, was I grossly immoral for doing that? I would say no, because from my perspective, what I'm doing is not immoral in this system that we operate in. So,
sure. Well, thank you very much for your answer.
No, thank you for calling in. It's a really good question.
You have a great night.
You too. Thanks. Bye.
Mm.
All right. Well, this has been good. Less hostile than I anticipated. Maybe everybody that has been commenting was just taking it easy on me. That's all it is. I did see that we had a super chat from MathPig. MathPig for £2. Thank you very much, MathPig. Okay. So the Flintstones are real. Obviously, dinosaurs and humans live together. I think that's pretty clear from the fossil layer. You can see that trees fossilized, standing through layers of sediment. Okay, that's because of the flood. B17 cures cancer. Water. All of these things are obviously true. Perhaps, MathPig, if you evolve a bit more, you won't say these things so tongue-in-cheek. Okay, I'm here to help. All right. Well, guys, I'm probably going to go ahead and call this. I've got the questions. I'm sorry, I'm just fading. But I've got the questions, and what I'm going to do is take some time and look them over, because I'm afraid I won't adequately answer them tonight. But this has been good. We've had a steady group of people watching. I really appreciate all of you. And we had some good calls, some good questions. And if you're watching this after the live stream and you say, man, I wish I'd have been there. I really wanted to ask Josh some really challenging questions. Maybe a good move is just to email skylarfictionshow@gmail.com and come on live and talk about it. Or even when we do like a call-in program over there, call in and ask your question there. I tend to not do these like this often because they do cause me some anxiety, and with the MS, it sort of amplifies the anxiety, but I thought it was an okay idea to do it now. But anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. And if you haven't liked the video, please do so. If you haven't subscribed, please give us a subscribe. We're getting close to 10,000. I think we're probably going to put a little video out, or at least talk about it. We're running that giveaway program. So if you take a screenshot of you sharing us on your social media and email it to us at digitalhammurabi@gmail.com. I think we're actually setting up another specific email for that. But we will enter you into like a sweepstakes or whatever. And we've got some swag. There were some Chan dice that we are ordering and signing, and we're going to give away when we hit 10,000 subscribers. So more to come on that. But anyway, sorry I'm fading. But thank you guys so much for watching. Until next time, resist poor scholarship. Always ask, how do you know that?